we talked in general about where we're getting our energy from in this country. We have to find a source for it. And I said that we're going to look at fossil fuel resources later and where we get which is where we get most of our energy from this day and time. And the first fossil fuel we'll look at is coal. And where do we use coal? Or excuse me, the amount of our energy that comes from coal is seen right here, which we've seen this chart before. We get about 20% of our energy from coal, and we've gone through the other numbers previously. So we want to know what is coal, what's good about it, what's bad about it, where does it come from, what's the main issues. Well, coal consists mainly of carbon, and it's a solid. Oil is a liquid, natural gas is a gaseous fuel, and but coal is chunks of carbon. Basically, it consists mainly of carbon. Unfortunately, it's got a few residues in it that, when you burn it, are left over, and some of those residues are not very environmentally friendly for us, because they're arsenics and mercury and other toxic metals and things in the residue that comes about after you've burned the coal. And we burn most of our coal in power plants, and so this residue that we call ash are put in ash ponds, and so that's one of the other that's one of the other issues with burning the coal we'll look at in just a minute. Looking at the chemistry of where this energy comes from, we have carbon, what that coal primarily is made up of, and that's where the energy comes from. We take oxygen from the atmosphere in the gaseous form with a free molecular oxygen, O2, and you get it started, and it burns, as we call it, and chemically produces CO2. The carbon reacts with one carbon molecule, which is two O's, not atoms, but molecules, and we get CO2. And unfortunately, CO2 is the primary global warming gas that is produced that we worry a lot about regarding warming of the planet. CO2 is a primary culprit. But during this reaction, the energy level of the carbon and oxygen separately on a chemical level, is higher than CO2, so it releases energy due to the chemical reaction. Higher energy on the left chemically than is on the right, so that energy is released, it comes off as heat, and that heat looks like a flame, and we can boil water with it, and we heat homes with it, and all kinds of things. So that's the chemical aspects of carbon. I mentioned a while ago about the ash. The ash, once they get through burning the coal, goes into ash pits, and these are like small lakes that have been had ash deposited in it for decades now, since coal started being burned in a big way with power plants, and over the last century. And sometimes those dams, the dams that hold those ponds and lakes in, break. There was one at Tennessee Valley Authority that dam broke, and this shows how it flowed down and covered up a house. In this case, it created a pretty major environmental disaster up in western Tennessee. And that's one of the side issues with coal that you don't hear much about, but it's getting to be more and more of an issue. Well, where do we get the coal from? Where do we get these chunks of coal? Well, we can get them from two types of mines. One is the open mines, and number two are the underground mines. Underground mines is where we primarily got them from originally, and that's the old coal mining industry, where mainly we had men go down there and build rails back in there, and they had picks and shovels, and they found seams of coal underground, and then they hauled it out of there by a lot of manpower. They still do some of that, but the mine that is pretty well dominates now is the open mine, where you just take a mountain that has coal in it underground, and they push the top of the mountain, the dirt off that exposes the coal that was underground, and then start digging the coal out in an open pit. And here's a photograph of the pit. These ridges that you see are actually trucks, truck roads, and roads for getting in and out. And you see here's a vehicle right down here. It winds around, it's many miles to get out when they load up these vehicles and trucks with coal and take it out. There's one that's been reclaimed. After they get through, they push some of the dirt back in and try to restore it to as environmentally friendly as possible. But that's strip mining and open mines. These are they have huge equipment now, of course, to get rid of the manpower, and that's the main advantage in open mines, is that you don't have to use a lot of manpower and labor. You can use these massive machines that you can't get underground, but you can work that can work above ground. And this claws the coal away and puts it on a conveyor belt and puts it on the truck. That tire on this vehicle is taller than a man. It's about 8 foot tall, 8 foot diameter tires, 10 feet somewhere in there. Gigantic equipment that hauls tons of coal out with every truckload. It's a lot of machinery. And then it's put on rail. The transportation of it from the coal mine to the power plant, which is where it's primarily used, it goes by rail, which is pretty efficient in many ways. But coal is pretty cheap coming out of the ground. But the shipping by train can easily double the cost that the power plant has to pay. They will have to pay as much to get it to the power plant on trains as they do to get it out of the mine onto the train. And a big coal power plant running in the summertime will consume about 100 rail car loads of coal a day. 100 rail car loads of coal a day for a big power plant that has to be brought in by rail every single day to keep it running. So it's a massive operation. So that's the coal industry pretty much. We don't import any significant coal. We actually export some, but all the U.S. coal that we produce that we consume is produced in the U.S. So we actually have a small export there. Unfortunately, it's pretty cheap fuel to export per BTU versus oil, for instance. So where do we use our coal? Well, about 93% of it is used by electric power plants. Industry in manufacturing things use coal in a lot of processes, about 7%. And then there's still, believe it or not, there's still a lot of buildings that are heated with coal boilers that are in the basement somewhere, and have to be fed coal. It is trucked in. So that's how we use coal. Here's the production history of coal in this country from, again, about 1950 all the way up to current. And you can see it's grown slightly over time. In fact, it's more than doubled, or approximately doubled, as we look at the trend. Notice it's flattened off. We had a drop right here. Why did we have a drop? That was primarily the economy. Remember the relationship between economics and how well we're doing and how much GDP we're producing and the amount of energy we're burning. Now we're actually, we're consuming less coal for various reasons, environmental reasons being one of them. We are starting to export more and more, but and that creates a little bit of a controversy, because if we're going to not burn it ourselves, cut down on the amount we use, but then we're going to export what we don't burn, that means somebody else is burning it, and from a worldwide basis, you still got a global warming problem. So lots of issues here that we start seeing with energy that are interconnected. Thank you.